Hello. Before we start the podcast this week, we have some exciting news, and Nicola Boyle from our marketing team is here to tell us what that is. Nicola, what's happening?
Hi, Ross. Yes, we have a live podcast recording. So it's taking place on the 12th of June after the first day of Festival of Work, and it's to coincide with our third birthday and also the 150th episode.
Ah, sounds fantastic. I suspect by that time I'll probably be quite hungry and thirsty. Is there anything free of note along those lines?
Yes, I'm sure you'll have a bite to eat and a few drinks as well.
Great. What time does it start?
So we have drinks beginning from 5:45 and the recording will begin at 6:30 p.m.
And I suppose the only final thing is, if I want to go to the event, what do I need to do?
So we'll pop the registration link for the podcast in the show notes. So you'll find the link there.
Great. It'll be all over our social media, and you won't be able to miss it. Unless you book too slowly and there's no tickets left and we're sold out. So
yes, very true.
You have to book it right now.
Just as soon as possible.
Right now. Not as soon as possible. Right now. Stop what you're doing and book it. We'll see you there. Now on with the show. Oh yeah, and the events in London. I should have said that. Right, bye.
Hello and welcome to the Good Practice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Ross Dickie, and this week we're looking at how L&D can use technology to deliver business impact. Stepping in for Owen, I'm joined by regular host Ross Garner. Hello, Ross.
Hello.
It was quite a sultry
it's strange
hello.
Being on this side of it.
Along with return guest Ajay Pangarkar, who's an author and performance strategist. Hello, Ajay. Welcome back.
Good afternoon, I believe, or good morning. I don't know, depending on what side of the world
your time zone.
Right
Yeah. So Ajay, you've been writing and speaking a lot recently about the sort of concept of lean learning. Would you mind kicking us off by just explaining what that means exactly?
Yeah, simply, lean learning is not something new. I'll start off with that comment. But it is relatively recent to the learning function, and defined basically, lean learning is simply about making the learning effort more effective and efficient, and probably more impactful within the organization. And it allows us to leverage things that we already have around us, especially in terms of technology, but as well as other resources, to ensure learning actually delivers the results it intends to deliver. And essentially, that's really what it is. It stems from the concept of Lean Six Sigma, as a lot of us know. And the pioneer in the Lean area about 40, 50 years ago was really, the poster child is Toyota, who implemented Lean to an extent. But simply what Lean is about maximizing the available use of resources in the most impactful way to the organization. So it's not about cost reduction or cutting costs and eliminating things within the organization. It's about reallocating resources to make the best use within the organization to deliver the most impact. And so we can do that in learning now.
So it's not about trying to do more with less, because there is part of it is about reducing inefficiency. Right, so there might be some people who are listening to this thinking, and working in L&D departments who don't necessarily think of themselves as heavily resourced, and it might sound as if you're wanting to come along and take away their toys. No,
not at all. I mean, essentially, the short answer is doing more with less. That's what Lean is about. But it's not really what that's about. So if you ask companies who effectively put Lean in place, the example I use regularly is when you look at, I'm going to go back to the Toyota example, or anybody who effectively uses Lean within the organization. Rarely do you ever hear these company, get on the news saying that they're laying off people or they're shutting down or shuttering plants. Whereas you hear companies who look at Lean, well, not necessarily Lean, but cost reduction as, the slash and burn syndrome where, okay, we're going to lay off a bunch of people, we're going to shut down plants. Rarely do you hear that from a Lean company, because what they're doing is they're actually saying, what are the resources do we actually need to be effective? And then the ones that become outdated or things that are not as useful as they once were are then reallocated rather than dismissed. They're actually put into other areas to show effectiveness. So the simple example is if one company says we're going to lay off people, that's a cost reduction. That's basically a mentality where we don't see any value, we're getting rid of it. Where a lean company will say, okay, we don't need these people here anymore. However, where can we put them elsewhere within the organization that would deliver equal value or more value? And so it's really a change in mindset. It's still doing more with less, but it's actually doing more with what's actually available. And that's sort of the subtle difference between the two.
How are you working out, though, where those efficiencies are going to be? Because L&D has a habit of borrowing terms from other industries and spinning them to our own purposes, but then ultimately kind of carrying on doing exactly what we were doing before. And it sounds like what you're talking about is that you would kind of review your entire L&D strategy and say, what are the things that we're doing that are not working? And I think most people would, at the outset, say, well, if only I had time to do that, but I've got all this other stuff to do. I've got all this busy work.
And that's the thing, right? It comes down to either doing the right things or doing things right. There's a little bit of both, but here, a lean practitioner, especially somebody who applies...
So you want to explain what that means? Sorry, I don't understand that. Maybe that's a stupid quick question. Doing the right things or doing things right?
Well, doing the right things means focusing on the things that add value, right? So it's sort of the anecdotal evidence, the definition of between leadership and management. So doing the right things means focusing on the things that will deliver the most value or the most impact. Where doing things correctly is management. It's actually taking that task and going through the proper steps to make sure they're done correctly. So there's one that focuses on value, there's one that focuses on execution. And so understanding the two, and a lean practitioner and somebody in lean learning, let's say, would look at their courses and not necessarily recreate the courses. Allow me to give you an example. So let's say you developed a course. E-learning or otherwise, it doesn't really matter. You develop the course, and you see this course for a particular issue or problem within the organization or department. You apply this course, and then you realize that there's a similar issue in another department, and that this course could apply. Now, what most learning practitioners may do is they'll just take the course and then take it from one area and then shove it and say, hey, we already have the course, take this, and just use it. Where a lean learning practitioner would say, okay, yeah, we do have a course, but there's not, rather than just take it and repurpose it, they will actually look at it and say, how do we take the existing resource in the course and accommodate it for that new problem or new issue within the other department? Because even though the problems are similar, they're not identical. And this is where learning tends to fail, right? Because what we do is typically we have a course on customer service and we'll put it in one department and we'll take that same course, but in customer service in another department, and we find out maybe one is successful and the other one failed. Where a lean person will say, okay, let's go back and see what is needed within this course and just, repurpose it accordingly and just deliver what is required within that new area. Or, let's take another scenario.
I'm going to stop you then before you go into another scenario, because I'm going I can hear a huge chunk of our audience going, Ajay, that's fine. A beautiful anecdote that you're telling us. But why are you using a course in the first place? If one team needs a course and then you find out another team needs the course, well, maybe it isn't actually the course that's the solution. Maybe there's a foundational problem that's the problem. And that now all you're doing is you're putting your finger in the hole in the sinking ship, and then another hole appears. You put another finger in there, and you keep doing that. So is this just something that applies to course design, or are where's that foundational aspect?
No, to your point, Ross, it's basically exactly that. A lean practitioner won't do that. They will look at the situation and say, no, we're not just going to apply a course somewhere else. They're going to say, we're not just plugging holes in a sinking ship. They're going to say, okay, we fixed this leak, and the leak is fixed permanently in this one area, but let's look at another area and say, okay, what is the best way to fix that leak? Now, it could be, through using that course and repurposing it, but rather they'll probably look at other ways of deploying those resources in a way that makes sense. But here's the deal. They're not trying to reinvent. They're trying to use available resources to the best of their ability and to make the most effective use of it. And you are correct. It's not about just using a course and course and course. That's the traditional learning practitioner. If you look at a Toyota learning practitioner, I guarantee you they're not doing that. They are looking at ways to find efficiencies. Okay, go for it, Ross.
I don't know. I don't know anyone that works at Toyota, so I have no idea. I'm wary of holding anyone up as these are the guys that we should follow
No.
without knowing otherwise. It's dangerous.
Okay, no, fair enough. But let's put this. And let's not pick on Toyota anymore. But let's look at the leading organizations within the world today. Why are they so successful? You have to ask that question. It's not because they're just shotgunning training all over the place. Let's take another example. Let's take a company like Starbucks. I don't know about you, but each time I go into Starbucks, and I'm not trying to promote Starbucks. I do enjoy Starbucks in passing, just by the way, but I'm not trying to promote it. But what I am impressed about is each time I walk in there, now I'm a straight black kind of coffee kind of guy, but the person in front of me who decides to do a shopping list of, the modifications they need to their latte, and it's like a 10-item modification to it. And within 3 minutes, I watched the barista in the back deliver the exact product that customer walked in for. Okay? That's not by accident. Right? It took it behind the scenes, what we don't see, that secret sauce that we always talk about. Behind the scenes is how Starbucks applies learning within the organization in a very targeted, precise approach, so that barista can deliver a product within 3 minutes as customized as the person wants. To me, that's just shockingly amazing. I mean, I don't know if it doesn't impress you, but to me, I just look at these processes.
Oh, no, it does. And I think you notice a difference when you go into Starbucks versus other coffee chains, for sure. I mean, the Starbucks production process is basically the Toyota production process.
But learning is driven into it, by the way. Let's just admit this. What we will not acknowledge is that, and companies don't come out there and say, hey, learning did it. But I guarantee you one thing, that if you talk about a Starbucks or Toyota or any of these companies that are successful, they would credit the fact that learning has been a large driver behind the scenes.
Are we not maybe overplaying that a little bit? I mean, with Starbucks, the barista isn't necessarily doing something that's that different with each individual drink. A lot of it is automated in a way that actually removes the need for learning from what they're doing day to day. So, I mean, I think it's kind of, you can point to companies that are very successful, like Starbucks or Toyota or Apple or, any of these sorts of companies. But I think it would be slightly arrogant of us to assume that that's all down to learning. The learning is the reason behind their success.
I'm not saying it's all learning. And you both of you know me that I come from a business background first, before I come from learning, and so I don't try to learn business from a learning perspective. I look at business and try to apply learning. The difference is here; it's not all learning. We call it an organization because it's a component of parts that are brought together through synergy to deliver an end result. So learning is one key element. What I'm trying to communicate here is that learning is an integral component to their success. Not a sole component, but an integral component. The difference is that you have to have the proper processes and culture and methodologies and leadership around these components to be able to do those things, but without implanting the knowledge within the minds of the employee properly. And I'm just saying, traditionally, what do we do in learning? We shove people in courses, and we hope, and maybe I'm being old school here, but we hope to goodness that something sticks and that they're able, and we wish and hope that when they get back to their job, they're actually able to apply it. That's an old school thinking. Where in a lean approach or a lean learning approach, they look at how do I get the employees to pull what they need, when they need it, where they need it, and how they need it. It's about getting employees to access the knowledge to improve themselves rather than shoving and hoping they improve themselves. And that's a subtle difference here. Because I can open a Starbucks, when we call it, Star Ajay, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But, I can open... Yeah, that's right. So you call it whatever you want, but I can open next door, and trust me, I can try to put the fancy coffee machines in back and set up the processes properly. But if I don't actually show and get think about it, get each employee to be consistently going through that process and applying it properly. So if I go to a Starbucks in Scotland and I go to Starbucks in Canada or Starbucks in the US, that coffee is identical. Or McDonald's. I mean, to me, and to your point, Ross, learning is not the sole driver, but it is a foundational element. And we see this, by the way, in performance management frameworks. I work with performance management frameworks all the time, the granddaddy being the balanced scorecard. But 30 years ago, when the founders of the balanced scorecard, Kaplan Norton, put it into place, they actually implemented learning in the scorecard of one of the 4 processes, which speaks to the fact that fundamentally, learning is an enabling competency within the processes of an organization. And it differentiates those successful organizations that we're speaking about from the ones that are just surviving or even failing at this point. I mean, that's the subtle difference. I'm not trying to get on my soapbox here and preachy, but I think what I'm trying to say here is that at the end of the day, learning practitioners feel that they're left out and that they're not part of the organization. But whenever I walk in, and both of you know, I've done work for Apple with a few years ago, for many years, and I see it. It's not by happenstance.
Claiming their success now? Is that?
No, not at all. No.
I said, Tim, it's Steve.
No.
It's a phone and an iPod.
we had lunch together several times, and I had to put the man straight after a while, and you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, I actually think this. I'm going to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the Starbucks example is a really good one. But, yeah, I think the Starbucks example is a really good one because it's one of those. You do get that consistent experience across the entire world. I'm certain that training is a massive part of it. And also you're training to be a cog in that Starbucks machine. And I bet there's intense pressure as soon as you start not to make a mistake. Because as soon as you make a mistake, that whole production line falls apart and the orders start piling up and everyone's stressed. Everyone wants to get in and out as fast as possible. And the Starbucks business model is to get as many cups of coffee over the counter as fast as they can. And they can't have any interruptions. So it's one of those situations where, we talk about like having checklists and stuff like that. They don't really have time to refer to a checklist for how to make a cappuccino or how to make whatever the mochaccino, frosty, latte, skinny, half calf thing. They have to know it right off the bat. And they have to take that knowledge from the world and put it into their head. And I think it's a great example of learning done well.
Now, allow me to take it deeper, though, because we're talking about lean learning, and it's not just this philosophy. It's about the tools within the organization. So let's go back a step here. All of us here go to conferences, and all we hear nowadays is all the wonderful technology that learning has available to them. And I'm pretty sure when I look around the room and I sit in some of these sessions, people are at one point impressed and say, wow, this is fantastic. But on the other hand, they're saying, how do I use this? What does it mean to me? Where do I get this? And why do I need it? And then suddenly we are becoming, the shiny new toy comes into play. They walk into their organizations, into their leader and say, we need VR, we need AI, we need this, and we need that. But again, it's every problem, if every problem looks like a nail, you're going to use a hammer. It's at the end of the day, it's just a tool, and then they fail. So the difference is that these tools are there, and they're fantastic tools, data analytics and XAPI and whatever else you want, gamification. But at the end of the day, it's about how lean learning approach is about how they leverage these tools as a vehicle to deploy learning and to ensure learning is effective appropriately within the organization. That's the difference. And essentially, I think if you have all these tools around you and you're blaming a tool, you're not looking in the mirror. And that's really what I have to say straight up. I'm sorry to say this to learning practitioners. It's a little bit of tough love, but it's never the tool that's at fault. It's the user. And so compiling these tools together appropriately. Again, I was with one client where they were looking at improving the customer service approach, and they realized after years of applying customer service that same way, shoving people into courses, whether it's on e-learning, whatever, it wasn't getting the effectiveness they wanted. And they decided to change their approach, and the learning team decided, let's step back here. We're repeating the same mistakes over and over again. What can we do different? And so working with them was quite amazing, because what happened is they looked at now they looked at the customer. So customer meaning the end user of the learning internally. How would they get the most benefit from the learning. And first of all, let's go back to our needs analysis. They identified exactly where were the problems, but they couldn't define exactly how each, whether you or somebody else had the same problem. So rather than try to apply the same solution to a common problem, they would identify very specific problems to each employee. And now we call this today big data and data analytics. But what they were doing before that was called, they would be doing what we call testing and assessment to find those weak areas through various means. It wasn't just, writing a quiz. It was actually doing simulations and doing interactions and identifying certain things that would drive this information back to the data system. And then they would do an analysis of the data and say, okay, well, Ross Garner had a weak area in doing this. And then Ross Dickie had another weakness in doing this area. So rather than say, okay, let's apply one course to everybody, let's go to Ross Garner and decide maybe to do some simulation calls with him to identify those problem areas and solve it. Whereas, Ross, I hate to put you under the gun here, Ross. Ross Dickie would be basically, let's shove him in a course because he didn't get anything at one time. But you know what I'm saying? It was very specific and very targeted. And this was due to driving data back into computer systems and analyzing it, understanding how to deploy learning appropriately to each individual, and not all learning, just what was required, and having access to that application. So it goes back to the term e-learning. If I can just share this with you, I'll shut up in a second. The E in front of learning.
I'm going to jump in, or I'm not going to let you.
Okay, Ross, go right ahead. So
you've talked enough. You
sound like my wife. There you go.
Because I think there's two sides of it. I mean, it sounds like an awful lot of work, what you just described. The needs analysis is a lot of work. You've got to invest in the capability to analyze that data. And then you've got almost like a personalized one-on-one support for everyone in the organization, right? So that all sounds like a cost. But then it sounds like on the flip side of that is there's the savings of not putting everyone through the same time-consuming course. And if performance increases for everyone, then there's you're making money off the back of it. But it was difficult to know how that balance sheet is going to come out in advance, isn't it?
So going back,
it sounds like a risk.
Going back to my first comment about doing the right things and doing things right, this is it, right? First of all, they're doing the right things. So they're looking at learning and identifying what's actually required. Not everything is required. And so when the learning department looks at the organization and the processes, they say, they don't just willy-nilly just decide that they're developing training. The needs analysis is not just done in isolation. It's actually, there's conversations held with the department leaders and say, what are the pressure pain points, the performance pain points that you're facing? Is it a process issue or is it actually a learning issue? And they identify the right things. And then, of course, they put into play appropriately, and they do it right, and they do it correctly, and most effectively, I should say, not correctly. They do it the most effective manner. So, yes, it's a lot of work, and if it was easy, then for the leaders at the end of the day, basically, you were talking about cost, and I know you're using it a little bit. If you mind me saying, Ross, you're using it a little bit, leading on to a negative context. But the term cost is not negative. We talk about cost-benefit analysis. At the end of the day, when the costs will always be there, they know learning is a cost, like every other support activity within an organization. But if that cost is adding value, so going back to your balance sheet or income statement, if they see the results being driven...
Actually, I don't know why I went in an accountancy example. I knew it was a mistake, even as I was saying it. But finish.
You went down the rabbit hole, my friend. Welcome to Alice in Wonderland. Basically, is this: when they see the value of that organization go up over time, they can't pinpoint it directly to learning. And learning should not be taking credit and saying it's us, because it is, to the point we spoke about before, it is an organization. There's a lot of processes in place. But at least they can say, well, the costs that were allocated here are improving that performance and ultimately are improving the output of the organization, which will increase the value of the balance sheet, which will increase the profitability of your income statement, and in the short term show an improvement in cash flow within the organization. I mean, those are all accountancy terms, but that's the purpose, right? So it's about economizing the cost. Going back to lean, it's about not just spending money all over the place, it's spending money in the right areas to add relevant value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I think you were saying my example was a good one, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of like drawing a through line from a learning intervention to performance improvement or improved business results, and L&D making a business case for itself, how do you do that? So I guess, like, how do you actually judge the efficiency or the effectiveness of a learning intervention? Because you talked at the beginning about the development of lean methodology at Toyota, and in Toyota you're sort of measuring, or in a manufacturing context, you're measuring your output and your success based on tangible things like the number of Priuses or Forerunners that you're making. But in a lot of organizations, like if you take the lean methodology outside of that manufacturing context, what you're measuring, it becomes a little bit more complicated, like trying to measure the efficiency, the effectiveness of, say, like a soft skills course. How do you actually draw that through line from the L&D department to improve business results? What sort of tools do we have at our disposal?
I remember we, in the last episode that we did, well, not the last, I think it was the first episode we did together, we had that conversation with Owen too, which was interesting because there's two things happening here. One, there's the tangible outcomes that we can sort of trace, the hard skills, as you spoke about. And then, of course, there's the soft skills. Let me part the soft skills for the time being. The hard skills actually, of course, please take this with a grain of salt, but relatively simple to measure. What I mean by that, going back to your example of Toyota, it's not the number of cars. I guarantee when you look into performance framework, it's not about the number of cars they're producing that's the output. I mean, I'm sure that there's a metric of how many cars they have to sell and market.
Yeah,
but
or like the number of accidents they're reducing, or
but it goes back to that. I think they're real because their philosophy is around quality. That their focus is around delivering. The commercials say it all. You see their adverts, and it's always about, this person has driven this Toyota Corolla for 300,000 kilometers or something stupid like that, right? And it's still on the road. That metric is probably more heavily weighted to Toyota. So now, if I'm the learning department, I know the culture of this organization is about improving that quality. So what does quality mean within Toyota? It means reliability. It means safety. It means whatever else you want to say, put in a car that as Toyota defines it. So all my efforts and my lean efforts are focused on those metrics. To be tangible about it, and I didn't mean to simplify this too much, but the hard accountability is that if I'm focusing on improving those quality metrics, whatever specific one I'm addressing through a learning approach, then I have to help them move that needle. I am one part of moving that needle, so I have to help them hit that target. So if it improves, if there's a quality rate of, defects on the cars that are at 10%, I use this common example, and they want to reduce it by 2% in the next 6 months, I have to be part of the solution in learning to help them move that needle down by 2%, because that 2% translates into hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of savings and efficiencies within the organization. And of course, the ultimate effect of increased customer satisfaction that allows them to sell more cars. So there's a cascading effect of what happens in Toyota. So that's, again, I said relatively easy, but it takes some investigation. You can't just sit there and guess what your internal customer expects. You have to make it tangible. So that's number one. The soft skills, on the other hand,
that goes into the learning design side as well. I think if you're trying to work out if what you're doing is actually going to have an impact, setting that target at the outset, we have a 2% reduction in accidents, say. What do we need to do in order to do that? It's a much better conversation than what does everyone want? What training do you all want?
And it's a conversation, right? I mean, you just said it. It's about having those conversations, not sitting in your cubicle making assumptions and waiting for somebody to tell you. It's actually going out there and being proactive and having those conversations and understanding. Essentially what I tell people in learning, and it's nothing, I'm not sitting here trying to preach that I know better than anybody. I don't. I'm just saying, let's use some common sense. If I'm going to go try to sell something to somebody, I need to understand what they need before I try to sell it to them. So it's the same thing for learning and development. You need to go out there and speak to those internal customers and say, before I start selling you on a course that I think you need, let's identify to find out what you actually need. And maybe by happenstance, it's not learning, but if it is, then let's make something that's relevant for you, because at the end of the day, I think I've said this before, but they're buying your product. They're giving you money, and if they're not satisfied, they have a right to ask for their money back. And they won't, but they will not be terribly happy with you. When it comes a second time to ask you for your help, they probably won't, or they'll be really hesitant to do so. So at the end of the day, they're not getting the goals that they want from you. If you have that conversation, they will. And that's a really important point, is to go out and have those conversations. But going to your design and development thing, again, when it gets into lean learning, they don't look at just, churning out the wheel. They look at, you have this budget, how do we make most effective use of this budget? Let's reduce cycle time on the design and the development of the learning. What do we have existing that can actually be adapted to apply to what your need is? And then how do we make sure that learning is implemented so it is deployed so it reduces the cycle time, so it doesn't increase work interruptions, especially on profit or revenue-generating primary activities within the organization. So they don't look at pulling Ross out and putting him into a course while he's working. They say, okay, when does Ross have some downtime? When is the time that it's slower within the organization? When is the cycle time? That's when we start putting things into place. So that's another lean approach. And then, okay, maybe...
I hate that lean approach, though. It depends how it's applied. But we're going to do a lunch and learn. Everyone's on their lunch hour. They're not doing anything anyway.
Oh, no, that's wrong.
That's wrong. You're like, well, hang fire.
No, you're going too far, Ross. You're going too far. No, the lunch and learn is really, to me, I agree with you on that. It's more like, okay, look, Christmas time, we're talking cars here, right? Christmas and that period is a pretty slow time for car companies.
Christmas Day, 8-hour work.
Merry Christmas.
While you're waiting for the turkey to cook.
Poor excuse to pick a man's pocket every December 25th.
But during the holiday season, between November and December, it's a slower time. So it's not an off time, but it's a slower time than, come February when they have to ramp up production. It's a time when they look at, okay, this is a time we need to start, or a recessionary period is coming up. You never hear lean companies rarely lay off during recessions. Actually, these companies actually invest more, believe it or not. They've increased their budgets. I know this for a fact back in the day. I don't know if they still do it, but Apple increased their
in the show notes.
No, Apple increased their budget in learning during the time when when they forecasted recessionary periods coming within the economy. They know when the down cycle, and they would say, okay, rather than lay off people and all this kind of wonderful stuff, we have our people, let's get them skilled up. When the recession starts ramping up, we'll be in a position to lead the charge. And so it's a very different mindset is what I'm trying to say. I mean, and largely it's a lot of a cultural mindset. I don't want to lie to people here. If your leaders are not in that mindset, it doesn't matter what I say with you guys right now. It's all for naught if your culture doesn't embrace it.
Okay, so we'll move on now to what I learned this week, our regular feature where we each share something that we've learned in the past 7 days. Ross, what did you learn this week?
So I am subbing in for Owen with an hour's notice, so apologies if I was struggling to come up with something of interest to say throughout this entire episode.
This is going to be about your dog,
didn't stop me. No, in fact, I've discovered a wonderful new artist, Prince, who I'm conscious is phenomenally famous, and everyone in the world knows every Prince song back to front, but I do not, and I think it's because of his I'm not going to have my music on the internet campaign that went on for years. So his music was not broadly available. You couldn't get it on YouTube and Spotify and things. But I've been listening on Apple Music now that he's dead and less picky, and so I've been listening to lots of Prince. Absolutely incredible. I finally get the Prince thing and I'm on board and I've been reading a bit about Prince, and I was reading about his name change to that symbol that the artist formerly known as. And when this was done in 1993, they were faced with a problem, which is that they needed newspapers and magazines to still be able to print his name with this symbol. And so what Prince and his, I think it was Warner possibly, or was it Fox? Whoever was his record label, had to send floppy disks to large media outlets with a custom font with that symbol on it so that they could still keep talking about the artist formerly known as Prince. And I just thought that was really cool.
That is cool. I haven't really listened to Prince either.
I'll tell you,
No,
unimpressed.
I don't really know very much. I mean, but besides sort of Purple Rain, I can't say I know very much of Prince's music. I think for the same reason. If it's not available on Spotify, I've probably not listened to it.
Well, now it is, and I would really recommend it. Sorry that we're really late to this part.
Actually, about Prince, the story behind Prince too. I don't know. I believe I'm relatively accurate here. It was a legal dispute with the record label.
With the name.
That's why he had to change. That's why he had to change his name to a symbol, because there was some legal issue where the record label, I don't know which record label he was with at the time, actually had proprietary rights to the name.
Huh.
And so the reason he had to change was not because he felt like it, which was sort of the way it was spun, that he was trying to change his image, but it was more of a legal issue that he couldn't keep his name. That's what I understand. And I could be completely left field right now. So.
I can tell you the record label was Warner Brothers, and I will fact check you as you share your what I learned this week.
Please do. Sure. Ross, you keep me in check. What have I learned? So, okay.
You are correct.
I am correct?
He was in a contractual dispute with Warner Brothers.
There you go. So, you're saying I'm right, is what you're saying?
10 points.
On that point, yes.
Let's put this on record. I'm right, is what you're
We'll
saying?
concede that ground.
I want this on record. I'm going to put it as my ringtone. Ross saying I'm right. Anyway.
Then he released 5 albums in quick succession in order to remove himself from his contract.
Are you just reading out his
Yeah.
Wikipedia
I'm reading the
entry?
Wikipedia page now.
He's making himself smarter.
Go on, Ajay. What did you
Okay.
learn this week?
By the way, a side note, he's written a lot of music for a lot of artists. I didn't know that when you re-listen to those songs, sound like his music, right? I mean, it's funny when you listen to it the first time, you don't know he wrote it. But anyways, side note. What I learned...
I mean, including from memory, Sinead O'Connor, Cyndi Lauper,
Yes.
Stevie Nicks,
Yes.
Madonna, Sheena Easton.
Yes.
These are just
Top
off
of
the
your
top of Google.
What I learned today... Let me talk, Ross, please? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
I've learned how to build a dining room table.
That's what we were waiting for?
Yes, you were. I learned how to build a dining room table. So of course, when I don't do this stuff and speak with you guys and have a blast talking to you and consulting with companies, I like to do things that give me self-gratification to see something, come to fruition. And so I build things. I'm trying to finish my basement right now. So I like seeing the result. So I decided to take on the challenge of building a dining room table. Now, my wife came across a very nice dining room table that cost like $4,000 at Restoration Hardware. And apparently, if you search long and hard enough on the internet, yeah, it's beautiful, but place is expensive as heck.
Yeah, we were there at the weekend, and it's just, never buy anything, but the food was great.
Never. But Ross, you can go online and search for all the plans to make those furniture, and we did find plans to build one of those $4,000 dining room tables, and for about $150 in material. I'm in the process of completing it right now, and it actually looks pretty good. I don't know. I'll give final pictures to you one of these days, but it was quite an interesting process because I always tell people, not everything has to be complicated in learning. I mean, how many of you, how many YouTube videos have you gone to just to learn something very quick and apply it? I've done that with this. I go on Google and go on YouTube, find the right videos, how to put something together, and apply it. And I've learned that skill. Now I can apply that skill in a variety of other situations. So it's been quite fun and quite interesting to do this. And that's an example of learning, retention and then application and then showing the end results at the end of this. And it's almost completed. So that's what I've learned.
Great.
Very cool.
Yeah, when you said you were building a table, I assumed you meant like from IKEA.
Yeah. Didn't know you were out there felling a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pillaging through the forest and, cutting down the redwoods and milling the wood. And yeah, I did all of that.
The last thing I learned from YouTube was how to change a light switch, and I was just like pouring sweat the whole time. I thought I was going to die. It was actually quite basic, but I just felt like it's such a heightened anxiety while I was doing it. Like I've definitely turned the fuse box off, but did I? But did I do it right?
It's a safe way to do it. Just shut down the whole house and you're good.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I wasn't taking any chances. Yeah.
Gentlemen, this is wonderful. I really enjoyed the time with you, and I hope if anybody has any questions or thoughts, or actually, here's what I like to end with.
Why are you wrapping up? Ross hasn't done his what I learned.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then I'll shut up. Okay, but
you suddenly take over hosting.
I should. Maybe I should. Maybe I should move to Chicago and take over the hosting.
I'll make it brief. So I went climbing for the first time in my life yesterday evening, and I think before. Have either of you climbed before?
No.
Yeah, that was the second sweatiest thing I've ever done.
Well, so,
after the lights.
Yeah,
I didn't do the staircase in my house count.
Did you build the staircase yourself?
No, I did once in another house.
Had to move.
No, so I think.
How did you find climbing, Ross?
It was great. It was very good fun. It was exhausting, but I think what I learned was that it shouldn't be exhausting if you're doing it well. It's a lot. There's a sort of perception that it's a lot about like upper body strength, and or like height. My girlfriend Melody was telling me that I had an advantage because I'm tall and I can reach the handholds more easily. But our friend Ewan, who we went with, has been climbing for the last few years, and it's a lot more. He said that if you're doing it right, it should all be fairly easy. It's still going to be tiring, but it shouldn't be exhausting. Your arms shouldn't necessarily be like shaking. It's more about sort of shifting your weight and positioning your body in the right way. And I also heard that if it looks pretty, you're not doing it right. No, it was very good fun, and I think something I'm going to continue.
Yeah, I did it for a little while when I was told that
I recommend
you almost not even have to use your hands. Like, it's just like your body weight, like, pressed
it's all on the legs,
and
apparently.
You let go and sort of comfortably stay there. But I never quite trusted that. It's just like so panicked the entire time.
Yeah, well, also using the auto belays, it's slightly nerve-wracking trusting a machine to safely guide you back to the floor. You have to just sort of jump out and let it catch you. And knowing that there's not somebody on the other end to do it is, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. But great fun.
Was that your first time, Ross, to do climbing?
Yes.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, first time. Yeah, so arms are definitely feeling it today.
Hey, you look great, though.
Oh, thanks.
If people on the podcast can see Ross, he looks fantastic.
And that is all for this week. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the show, you can find us on Twitter. Ross is...
At Ross Garner GP.
Ajay is...
At Biz Learning Dude, B-I-Z Learning Dude.
And I am at Ross_Dickie. You can also tweet at GoodPractice or at GoodPracticeAUS. To find out more about Good Practice, our performance support toolkit, bespoke e-learning at LMS, visit goodpractice.com. Ajay, is there anything you'd like to plug before we wrap up?
Maybe I can plug Starbucks and get some free coffees for the year. I'm not sure. No, actually, I do write for elearningindustry.com on a regular basis. I'm a regular contributor for them. So if anybody wants some free resources, there's a bunch of articles that will hopefully be helpful to them. I am speaking at a couple of conferences coming up. One is actually a webinar tonight with AITD. I'm not sure this will be posted at this point, but you might want to edit that part out. I will be speaking at upcoming conferences at Learning Dev Camp and Salt Lake City, Utah in mid-June, as well as a training industry conference and expo in Raleigh, North Carolina towards the end of June. So if you want, hit me up with questions or thoughts, please do so and come see me, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Lovely. Next week, Ross will be back with Owen and guest JD Dillon to talk about shiny object syndrome. Intrigued? Then subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes while you're at it. It'll only take a few minutes, but has a big impact on how new people discover the show. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.